Welcome back to the channel.
For 2,000 years, humanity has missed the most revolutionary truth ever spoken. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Not Christ for you, not Christ above you, but Christ in you. This single realization changes everything about healing, abundance, and the nature of your identity. Most seekers spend lifetimes looking outward for what already dwells within their own consciousness. Joel Goldsmith discovered that this indwelling Christ is not a religious concept, but a living presence of divine consciousness that constitutes your true self. When you grasp this mystery, you stop begging an external God for help and begin recognizing the infinite power already established at the center of your being. This is not blasphemy, but the deepest truth of mystical Christianity. The moment you understand Christ in you as your actual identity, not as something you must achieve or become worthy of, the entire spiritual search collapses into recognition. You are not trying to reach God. You are awakening to the God presence that has been your reality since before time began. This is the secret that transforms everything. Traditional religion taught you to pray to a distant deity, begging for intervention in your problems. Joel Goldsmith revealed this approach keeps you in spiritual infancy, forever dependent on something outside yourself. The mystery of Christ in you means divine power is not in heaven waiting to descend, but already established as the essence of your consciousness right now. When you truly comprehend this indwelling presence, prayer transforms from petition to recognition.
You are not asking God to do something.
You are acknowledging what already is. The Christ within you is not dormant, waiting to be activated. It is the living reality of your being, expressing as the intelligence that beats your heart and breathes your breath without your conscious effort. This understanding dissolves the separation between human and divine that has plagued religion for centuries. You are not a sinner seeking redemption from an angry God. You are divine consciousness itself, temporarily forgetting its true nature. The journey is not from human to divine, but from ignorance to recognition of what you have always been. Joel Goldsmith taught a specific practice to realize this indwelling Christ. Sit quietly and turn your attention inward, not seeking anything, but simply becoming aware of the awareness itself. Ask yourself, what I am aware of my thoughts right now. What is conscious of this moment? That witnessing presence is Christ in you, the eternal observer that never changes, regardless of circumstances. This practice requires patience, because the mind immediately wants to make it complicated or turn it into another doing. But Christ consciousness is not achieved through effort. It is revealed through stillness and the withdrawal of attention from the outer world of effects. When you rest in this inner awareness regularly, even for 5 minutes daily, something begins to shift in your perception of reality. Most people experience this shift gradually over weeks or months. You notice less reactive behavior, greater peace amid chaos, and circumstances that once disturbed you lose their power. This is not positive thinking, but the natural result of identifying with the changeless Christ within, rather than the changing human conditions without. Your center of gravity moves from effect to cause. The practical power of this realization becomes evident in daily challenges, such as illness, financial hardship, or broken relationships. The typical human response is panic and frantic problem solving. But when you understand Christ in you, you pause and recognize that the divine presence within you is untouched by these appearances. The problem exists in the world of effect, not in consciousness itself. Joel emphasized that this is not a denial of problems but recognition of a deeper reality. You acknowledge the appearance while simultaneously knowing that Christ consciousness contains no disease, no lack, no discord. As you rest in this awareness, solutions emerge that the anxious human mind could never conceive. Healing happens not through struggle but through the natural expression of wholeness. That is your true identity. This understanding requires spiritual maturity to grasp fully. You are not pretending problems do not exist. You are seeing them from the standpoint of consciousness, rather than from the standpoint of struggling humanity. From this elevated perspective, what seemed insurmountable often dissolves or transforms in unexpected ways. This is mystical Christianity in action. Sarah spent 15 years in a traditional church, faithfully attending services and praying for her chronic anxiety to be healed. Despite her devotion, the panic attacks intensified until she could barely leave her home. Everything changed when she encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on Christ in you. During a desperate online search one sleepless night at 3 in the morning, she began the practice of turning within to recognize the divine presence as her actual identity. The first 2 weeks brought no relief, and she nearly abandoned the approach. But something shifted in week 3. During a panic attack, instead of fighting the sensations, she remembered Christ in you and became aware of the awareness. Witnessing the panic, the attack did not stop immediately, but she experienced herself as larger than the symptoms for the first time. Over the following 3 months, Sarah practiced this recognition multiple times daily. The panic attacks gradually decreased in frequency and intensity. More importantly, her relationship with them changed completely. She no longer identified as an anxious person trying to become peaceful. She recognized herself as a piece of Christ consciousness, temporarily experiencing anxiety as a passing wave. This shift in identity transformed her life more than any medication or therapy ever had. Michael faced bankruptcy after his business collapsed during an economic downturn. For 6 months, he prayed desperately for God to send money, clients, or any kind of rescue. Nothing came. Exhausted and bitter, he stumbled across Joel Goldsmith's writings about the Christ within as the source of infinite supply. Initially, he dismissed it as impractical mysticism when he needed concrete solutions immediately, but desperation made him willing to try anything. He began meditating on the principle that Christ consciousness lacks nothing and expresses as abundance. For 4 weeks, his financial situation continued, deteriorating while he practiced, recognizing divine completeness within. Then an unexpected call came from a former colleague who needed exactly Michael's expertise for a consulting project he never knew existed. That single project led to 3 more within 2 months. Michael's income not only recovered but exceeded his previous business earnings within 6 months. More significantly, his entire relationship with money transformed. He no longer experienced the anxiety of depending on external circumstances because he had touched the inner source of supply that never runs dry. This was not magic, but the natural expression of consciousness that knows itself as complete. Jennifer's marriage crumbled after 23 years when her husband announced he no longer loved her. The devastation sent her into deep sadness and obsessive prayers for God to change his heart. For 8 months, she begged, bargained, and pleaded with no results. A friend recommended Joel Goldsmith's teachings, which she initially resisted because she wanted her husband back, not spiritual philosophy. During her crisis, she finally began the practice of recognizing Christ in you during her darkest moment of despair. At first, it felt like empty words while her heart was breaking. But she persisted, turning multiple times daily to acknowledge the divine presence that remained untouched by her circumstances. Gradually, over several weeks, she noticed moments of unexpected peace breaking. Through the grief like sunlight, through storm clouds. After 3 months of consistent practice, something profound shifted. She realized she had been seeking completion in her husband, rather than recognizing the wholeness already present in consciousness. The marriage did not restore, but she discovered an inner fulfillment that no relationship could give or take away. A year later, she understood that losing the marriage led her to find her true self, which was the greater gift all along. This is the mystery of Christ in you, transforming devastation into liberation. These transformation stories share a common thread that Joel Goldsmith emphasized repeatedly. None of these individuals experienced instant miracles. Each practiced recognition of the indwelling Christ consistently over weeks and months, often while circumstances appeared unchanged or even worsened. The turning point came not when God finally answered their prayers, but when they shifted identity from struggling human to consciousness itself. This is the radical difference between religious prayer and mystical realization. Religious prayer assumes you are separate from God and must convince the deity to intervene. Mystical realization recognizes you are the very consciousness of God, individualized, and your recognition of this truth allows it to express naturally through your experience. The power was never absent, only recognition was missing. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover the Christ within your own consciousness, like this video to help others find Joel Goldsmith's revolutionary teachings. Subscribe for more mystical Christianity wisdom that actually transforms lives, and comment on which story resonated most deeply with your current spiritual journey. Your engagement helps spread this liberating truth. Beyond the foundational practice of recognizing Christ in you, Joel Goldsmith taught complementary techniques that deepen realization. The first is what he called resting in the Word. When a problem appears demanding attention, instead of mentally wrestling with solutions, you rest in a spiritual truth such as Christ in me is my sufficiency. You do not repeat it mechanically, but let consciousness itself reveal the depth of meaning within those words. This is not affirmation or positive thinking. Affirmations assume something is wrong that needs fixing. Resting in truth assumes everything is already complete in consciousness, and you are allowing that completeness to reveal itself. You might spend 5 to 15 minutes simply being with one statement, letting it unfold its implications in your awareness without mental effort or strain. Many students report that during this practice, insights arise spontaneously that completely reframe their understanding of the situation. A problem that seemed insurmountable suddenly appears from a new angle where a solution becomes obvious. This is not your human mind figuring things out, but Christ consciousness revealing itself through your awareness. The practice creates space for divine intelligence to emerge naturally. Another powerful technique Joel taught is listening for the still small voice. After acknowledging Christ in you, sit in receptive silence with the inner question, what is the truth about this situation? Do not try to answer with your thinking mind. Simply listen in the silence as you would listen for a distant sound. Most of the time, no words come, just deepening peace. Occasionally, a knowing arises that is distinct from your usual mental chatter. It comes as gentle certainty rather than anxious thought. It might be a simple instruction, a Bible verse, or just a felt sense of what to do next. Joel emphasized that this inner voice never brings condemnation, fear, or urgency. Those signals indicate ego speaking, not Christ consciousness. The true inner voice brings peace even when it challenges your preferences or plans. Developing this listening capacity requires consistent practice over months because you must learn to distinguish the authentic inner voice from the many imitations the mind produces. Start with 5 minutes of listening silence daily. Over time, you develop a sensitivity to the quality of Christ, consciousness that cannot be counterfeited. This becomes your reliable inner guidance for all decisions far surpassing human reasoning alone. Joel Goldsmith also taught a practice he called living by grace. Throughout your day, pause periodically to remember Christ in you as the source of your activity. Before important meetings, difficult conversations, or challenging tasks, take 30 seconds to silently acknowledge the divine presence as the intelligence acting through you. This is not asking for help, but recognizing what is already true about your being in every moment. Many students discover this transforms their effectiveness dramatically. When you remember you are not acting from limited human capacity but from infinite consciousness, anxiety about outcomes dissolves. You bring full presence to each moment rather than mentally rehearsing what you will say or worrying about results. This allows creativity and wisdom to flow through you naturally rather than being blocked by self-consciousness and fear. The practice seems simple, almost too simple to be effective, but Joel insisted that the most profound truths are always simple, though not easy to live consistently. The challenge is not complexity, but remembering to recognize Christ in you amidst the demands of daily life. Students who practice these periodic pauses throughout their day report feeling carried by a power beyond themselves rather than struggling through life alone. A final complementary practice involves what Joel called impersonalization. When someone seems to be creating problems in your life, the human tendency is to blame them, resent them, or try to change them. But when you understand Christ in you, you also recognize Christ in them, even when their behavior appears anything but divine. This does not mean accepting harmful behavior, but seeing through the appearance to the truth. Silently acknowledge to yourself that this person is also Christ, consciousness expressing, even if they have forgotten it. Completely their troublesome behavior comes from that forgetfulness, not from their true nature. As you hold this recognition in consciousness, without telling them, something often shifts in the relationship. They may become less antagonistic, or circumstances may change so you no longer must interact, or you develop compassion that transforms the dynamic entirely. This practice requires spiritual maturity because it goes against every human instinct for justice and vindication. Clears throat. But Joel taught that you cannot experience the Christ in you while denying it in others. The recognition must be universal, or it remains merely intellectual concept, rather than living realization. As this recognition deepens, you discover that there truly is only one, consciousness appearing as many, and separation was always the illusion. Even with consistent practice, students encounter predictable obstacles that can derail realization, if not understood. The first challenge appears in the initial weeks when nothing seems to happen. You faithfully practice recognizing Christ in you, but problems persist and peace remains elusive. The temptation becomes strong to conclude the teaching does not work or you are doing it wrong. Most seekers abandon the practice at this critical stage. Joel warned that consciousness does not respond to human timelines. Your dedication to recognizing truth is like planting a seed. You cannot dig it up every day to check for growth without destroying the process. The seed germinates in darkness, invisible to the surface observer. Your consistent recognition is germinating in consciousness, preparing to emerge as visible transformation. But you must trust the process even when you see no evidence yet. He recommended continuing the practice for at least 3 months before evaluating results, not because God needs time to answer, but because your consciousness needs time to accept a truth that contradicts everything your human experience has taught. This is reprogramming at the deepest level, and it happens gradually for most people, not instantly. The few who experience immediate transformation are exceptions, not the standard to measure yourself against. Another common obstacle emerges when initial transformation occurs but then seems to reverse. You experienced weeks of peace and improved circumstances. Then suddenly old problems resurface with intensity. This feels like failure or loss of connection with Christ consciousness. In reality, Joel explained this is consciousness testing the depth of your realization. Have you truly recognized Christ in you as your permanent identity, or was it just a temporary, feel-good experience? These apparent setbacks actually serve your spiritual growth by revealing where you are, still identified with human conditions, rather than divine consciousness. When the peace you felt disappears, you discover whether you were resting in truth itself or merely enjoying a pleasant emotional state. This distinction is crucial. Emotional states come and go. Recognition of Christ consciousness remains constant beneath all changing conditions. The breakthrough comes when you continue recognizing truth even while experiencing difficulty. You acknowledge the problem while simultaneously knowing that Christ in you remains untouched by it. This dual awareness, seeing both the appearance and the reality, is spiritual maturity. Over time, circumstances improve not because you maintained the right feeling, but because your identity shifted from the level of effect to the level of cause where Christ consciousness operates. A third major obstacle occurs when doubt arises about whether this indwelling Christ is real or just comforting imagination. Your rational mind, trained by material education and secular culture, questions whether consciousness is truly divine or merely brain chemistry. This intellectual doubt can undermine your practice unless addressed directly with Joel's teaching about demonstration rather than belief. He emphasized that you do not need to believe in Christ consciousness for it to be true. The sun does not require your belief to shine. Your task is not manufacturing faith but testing the principle through experience. Practice the recognition consistently and observe what happens in your life over months. Results become your evidence, not clear's throat, theological arguments, or other people's testimonies alone. Many students discover that doubt itself becomes less relevant as demonstration increases. When you experience healing, supply, guidance, or peace that cannot be explained by human effort alone, intellectual questions fade into background noise. You may never fully understand how Christ consciousness operates, but you know it does through direct experience. This experiential knowing surpasses belief and dissolves doubt more effectively than any logical argument could achieve. The final major obstacle appears when you experience genuine transformation, but then attempt to use Christ consciousness as a technique to manipulate outcomes. You healed once, so you try forcing the same result in another situation. You supplied a need, so you demand supply on your timeline for current desires. This subtle shift from recognition to manipulation sabotages the entire process and returns you to struggle. Joel was adamant that Christ in you is recognized, never used. The moment you Try to use spiritual truth to get what you want. You have reverted to the very separation consciousness the teaching is meant to dissolve. You cannot use God because you are not separate from God. You can only recognize and allow the divine nature to express itself naturally, which may look different than your human preferences would dictate. If these insights about overcoming obstacles speak to your spiritual journey and you are ready to move beyond common pitfalls that stop most seekers, like this video to support content that tells the truth about the challenges of realization. Subscribe for advanced teachings that take you deeper into mystical consciousness, and comment on which obstacle you recognize in your own practice right now. Honesty accelerates breakthrough as your realization of Christ in you deepens through consistent practice over months and years. You begin noticing shifts in how you navigate complex life situations. David, a corporate executive, faced an ethical dilemma when his company pressured him to approve financial reporting that bordered on fraudulent. His career and family security depended on compliance. Yet his conscience rebelled against the deception, creating impossible tension. Instead of anxiously weighing options or seeking advice from multiple sources, David turned within to recognize Christ consciousness as his true employer and source of supply. He spent 20 minutes in silence, acknowledging that divine intelligence within him already knew the right action and would provide whatever he genuinely needed. No dramatic voice or vision came, just deepening peace and clarity that he must refuse regardless of consequences. He declined to approve the report and prepared for termination. Instead, within 3 days, the board launched an investigation that exposed the scheme and removed the executives who initiated it. David received a promotion for his integrity. More importantly, he learned that when you trust Christ consciousness within you, rather than manipulating circumstances from fear, life reorganizes itself around truth in ways the human mind cannot orchestrate. This is advanced application of the principle. Teresa faced a different challenge when her adult daughter became addicted to opioids and refused all help. For 2 years, Teresa cycled through enabling tough love, desperation, and grief. While her daughter deteriorated, every approach failed. Prayer seemed to bounce off the ceiling. The situation appeared hopeless until Teresa finally understood that her anxious prayers were coming from the belief that her daughter was separate from Christ consciousness and needed fixing. She began a new practice based on Joel's teaching. Instead of praying for her daughter to change, she spent time daily recognizing that Christ in you is as true for her daughter as for herself. The divine presence constitutes her daughter's reality, regardless of current appearances. Teresa could not see or feel this truth in her daughter's behavior, but she held the recognition in consciousness, like a beacon without demands for specific timing or outcomes. For 4 months, nothing visible changed while Teresa continued this practice through doubt, discouragement, and heartbreak. Then her daughter called from a hospital where an overdose nearly killed her, suddenly willing to enter treatment. 2 years later, the daughter maintains recovery and credits an inexplicable moment of clarity as the turning point. Teresa knows that Christ consciousness, working through recognition, in one individual can touch another when human methods fail. This is the mystery of oneness. Robert, a physician, integrated Christ consciousness into his medical practice after years of feeling like a fraud who treated symptoms without addressing real causes. He began each day recognizing the divine presence as the true healer, with himself as merely the instrument through which healing emerges. Before seeing each patient, he paused to acknowledge Christ in you for both himself and the person he would treat, regardless of their beliefs. This practice transformed his effectiveness in ways he could not explain medically. Patients who seemed treatment-resistant suddenly responded. Diagnosis came with unusual clarity. He found himself asking questions or ordering tests his training did not suggest, which then revealed hidden issues. Colleagues noticed his patient outcomes improved significantly, though his techniques remained conventional medicine. Clears throat. The difference was consciousness, not methodology. Robert learned that Christ in you does not replace practical action, but infuses it with divine intelligence that surpasses human knowledge. He still used all his medical training, but now as an instrument of consciousness rather than relying solely on intellectual understanding. This integration of mystical realization with practical responsibility is the mature expression. Joel Goldsmith taught, "You do not abandon the human while recognizing the divine. You let the divine express through the human naturally." These advanced cases reveal a crucial principle. Christ consciousness does not remove you from the world into spiritual bypassing. It enables you to function in the world with wisdom, power, and love that transcend ordinary human capacity. You still face situations requiring decisions, action, and courage, but you face them from the standpoint of your true identity, rather than from fear, lack, or separation. Joel emphasized that mystical realization is not escape from responsibility, but fulfillment of it at a higher level. You bring the consciousness of the infinite into finite situations, which transforms them from within rather than through external manipulation. This is living by grace rather than by human struggle. The circumstances of your life become the very place where Christ consciousness demonstrates itself, not an obstacle to spiritual attainment. The integration typically takes several years of consistent practice before it becomes natural rather than something you must remember to do. But those who persist discover they are living from a source within themselves that never runs dry, never panics, and never abandons them regardless of what appears in their external world. This is the promise of Christ in you fulfilled through realization, not as theological concept, but as living experience that changes everything. When you truly understand and live from the mystery of Christ in you, your entire relationship with existence transforms permanently. Problems do not disappear, but you see them from the standpoint of consciousness rather than from the standpoint of struggling humanity. This shift in viewpoint changes everything, even when nothing externally changes immediately. You know yourself as the awareness in which problems appear rather than as a victim of problems. This recognition brings a quality of peace that others notice even when they cannot identify what changed about you. You move through challenges that would have devastated your former identity with a centeredness that seems incomprehensible to those still identified with human conditions alone. You are not superhuman or beyond emotion. You simply know your true nature, and that knowing provides an anchor that holds regardless of storms on the surface. Joel taught that this is the consciousness Jesus demonstrated and invited everyone to share. Christ in you was never meant to be Jesus's exclusive possession, but the truth about every person who walks the earth. The mystery was hidden, not because God kept secrets, but because humanity looked everywhere except within their own consciousness. Now you have found what you were seeking, not in heaven above or in practices and rituals, but in the very center of your own being. From this realization flows spontaneous qualities that used to require effort. Love emerges naturally when you recognize the same divine presence in others that you know in yourself. You cannot hate or harm the Christ consciousness you see expressing everywhere, even imperfectly. Compassion arises not as moral obligation, but as recognition of the one life appearing as many, all of it seeking to awaken to itself through diverse experiences and apparent mistakes. Forgiveness becomes effortless when you understand that those who harmed you were acting from forgetfulness of their true nature, not from their divine reality. You need not condone harmful behavior to recognize the Christ in perpetrators as well as victims. This recognition frees you from carrying resentment that only poisons your own consciousness. You release others not for their sake but for yours, because you cannot experience inner peace while maintaining mental prisons. Gratitude flows continuously when you recognize that Christ consciousness is the source of every good thing in your life. You are no longer dependent on people, circumstances, or your own abilities for well-being. All of that comes from the infinite within you, expressing as exactly what you need when you need it, often in ways you would never have arranged yourself. This recognition transforms your entire experience of life from anxious grasping to receptive allowing. The practical implications of living from Christ consciousness extend into every area of existence. In relationships, you no longer desperately seek completion in another person because you have found wholeness within yourself. This allows you to love freely rather than from need. In work, you recognize divine intelligence as the source of your creativity and effectiveness, which eliminates anxiety about competition or performance. You do your best and trust consciousness to provide what you require. Regarding health, you see the body as the expression of consciousness rather than a material object subject to inevitable decay. This does not mean denying physical symptoms, but recognizing a deeper reality that can overrule material conditions when consciousness awakens to itself. Many students experience healing of chronic conditions not through treating the body, but through deepening recognition of their true nature as consciousness itself. With finances, the understanding that Christ in you is infinite supply dissolves the belief in lack that creates financial struggle for most people. You recognize that money and resources are effects of consciousness, not causes. As your consciousness awakens to its own completeness, the effects follow naturally. This is not magic or metaphysical manipulation, but the natural order of existence that most people reverse by looking to effects to supply their needs instead of looking to cause. You stand now at the threshold of a completely new life. Though it may not look different externally, yet you have discovered the supreme secret that every mystic throughout history found and tried to communicate. Christ in you is not future promise or distant hope, but present reality. This moment as you read these words, the full presence of divine consciousness, is the awareness within you that comprehends this truth. You need not wait for more spiritual development or greater worthiness. You need not fear that you misunderstood or cannot maintain the realization. Christ consciousness is not maintained by you because it is you, and it never waver regardless of human inconsistency. Your only task is recognition when you forget, not achievement of what already is. This recognition becomes easier and more natural with practice until it becomes your default state, rather than something requiring effort. Joel Goldsmith spent his life pointing to this one truth in countless ways because he knew that genuine understanding of Christ in you is the liberation of humanity from every form of bondage. You have received the teaching. Now begins the lifelong joy of deepening realization through direct experience. As consciousness reveals itself to itself through your unique expression, the mystery is no longer hidden. It lives as you. If these teachings have opened your understanding to the revolutionary truth of Christ, consciousness as your actual identity, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's mystical Christianity that actually transforms lives. Subscribe for more content that takes you beyond religion into direct realization, and comment with I am Christ consciousness to declare your recognition of this truth. Your journey into living from your true nature begins. Thanks for watching.